There comes a quiet moment in a woman's life that no one applauds. No dramatic exit, no long speech, no final argument. It's the moment she realizes that every time she explains herself, she's begging to be understood by someone who benefits from misunderstanding her. At first, she thinks explaining is love. Then she thinks it's patience. Eventually, she understands the truth. Explaining has become self-betrayal. And the moment she stops explaining, she doesn't lose her voice. She finds her worth. This is not a story about anger. It's a story about awakening. Explaining is rarely about clarity. More often, it is a response to an old, invisible wound that learned to speak long before the woman herself understood why. Somewhere early in life, she discovered that being misunderstood carried consequences. Love was withdrawn. Affection cooled. Safety felt uncertain. And so she adapted. She learned to soften her words, stretch her sentences, and translate her feelings into something more acceptable. Explaining became a survival instinct, not a choice. At first, it feels innocent. She explains because she wants harmony. She explains because she believes understanding will bring closeness. She explains because she assumes that if she can just find the right words, the tension will dissolve. But beneath this behavior lives something far older and far quieter. The fear that being fully seen without translation might lead to rejection. Psychologically, this pattern forms when a child learns that their inner world is inconvenient. When emotions are dismissed, minimized, or misunderstood, the child does not stop feeling. Instead, she starts justifying. I didn't mean it like that. I'm not trying to be difficult. Let me explain. Over time, these phrases become automatic. They are not thoughts, they are reflexes. The nervous system remembers what the mind tries to forget. As an adult, she carries this reflex into relationships, workplaces, friendships, and even strangers. She explains her tone. She explains her boundaries. She explains her exhaustion. And each explanation is an attempt to prevent an old pain from returning. The pain of being unseen. The pain of being misunderstood and left alone with her truth. What makes this wound so powerful is that it disguises itself as kindness. She is praised for being patient, accommodating, emotionally intelligent. But inside, something erodes. Each explanation quietly suggests that her initial expression was insufficient, that her first truth was not enough. Slowly, she begins to distrust her own voice. Real life offers countless reflections of this pattern. In conversations, she notices she speaks longer than necessary, filling silence with clarification. At work, she over-prepares, anticipating objections that were never voiced. In relationships, she revisits the same issues, explaining the same feelings, hoping that repetition will eventually turn into understanding. Yet the more she explains, the less grounded she feels, because what she is really doing is arguing for the validity of her own inner experience. There comes a moment, often after deep exhaustion, when she senses the truth she has been avoiding. The wound is not that she is unclear, but that she is explaining herself to those who are not listening. And this realization is destabilizing. It forces her to confront a painful question. If she stops explaining, what will happen? Will she be abandoned? Will she be misunderstood forever? Will silence confirm her deepest fear, that her truth is not welcome? This is where the psychological turning point begins. She notices that explaining has not healed the wound. It has only kept it open. Each explanation is a reopening of the same scar, a reminder that her reality still needs approval. The psyche grows tired of this cycle, and tiredness, more than anger, initiates transformation. When she begins to experiment with silence, it feels unnatural. The urge to clarify rises like panic. Her body reacts as if danger is near. This is not weakness, it is conditioning. The nervous system has been trained to equate silence with loss, but if she stays present, something remarkable happens. The world does not collapse. Some people lean in, some grow distant, some reveal that they were never interested in understanding her, only in keeping her explainable. This is where the unseen wound starts to heal, not because others change, but because she does. She realizes that her worth was never meant to be negotiated through language. Her feelings do not require footnotes. Her boundaries do not need essays. The psyche begins to reclaim its authority, integrating what was once split, inner truth and outer expression. In this integration, explaining loses its urgency. She speaks when she chooses, not when she fears. She notices a quiet confidence replacing anxiety. Not loud, not performative, but steady. The wound that once demanded explanation softens because it is no longer being activated by self-betrayal. She understands now that being misunderstood by the wrong people is less damaging than abandoning herself for the sake of being understood. This realization is not empowering in a dramatic sense, it is grounding. It returns her to herself. And in that return, the old wound finally meets something it was denied for years: respect. Not from others, but from within. The need to explain does not arise from strength, it arises from a subtle imbalance within the psyche, where one part seeks permission from the outside to confirm what the inside already knows. Whenever a woman feels compelled to explain herself, she is often standing at an invisible threshold, unsure whether her inner truth is allowed to exist without external validation. In that moment, power quietly shifts away from her, not through force, but through consent she did not realize she was giving. Every explanation places her inner world into someone else's hands. It invites judgment, interpretation, and approval. What begins as an attempt to be understood slowly becomes a habit of surrendering authority over her own experience. She may not notice it at first because it feels polite, reasonable, even loving. Yet beneath the surface, a subtle transaction is taking place. She's offering her reality for review, and in doing so, granting others unconscious power over how she perceives herself. This dynamic often begins early, when a child learns that her feelings are questioned or corrected. She adapts by explaining them. I wasn't angry, I was just tired. I didn't mean it like that. Each explanation becomes a bridge she builds so others will not withdraw. Over time, the bridge turns into a habit, and the habit into a belief that her experience is incomplete unless someone else agrees with it. The psyche absorbs this belief quietly, carrying it into adulthood where it shapes relationships, choices, and self-image. In adult life, this pattern reveals itself in subtle ways. She explains her boundaries as if they are negotiable. She explains her decisions as if they require permission. She explains her silence, her needs, her limits, hoping that clarity will earn respect. But respect does not arise from explanation. It arises from presence. The more she explains, the more she teaches others that her truth is flexible, open to debate, and dependent on their understanding. Unconscious power thrives in this space, not because others are always malicious, but because human dynamics naturally fill vacuums. When she hesitates, someone else steps in. When she over-explains, someone else defines the meaning. When she doubts, someone else decides. This power shift is rarely dramatic. It is quiet, almost invisible, yet deeply influential. Over time, she may notice that conversations feel unbalanced, that her words are weighed more heavily than others, that she is constantly clarifying while others simply state. There is a psychological cost to this. Each explanation fragments the self. One part speaks, another watches anxiously, wondering how it will be received. This internal division weakens her center. Instead of standing in her truth, she hovers above it, ready to adjust, retract, or soften. The more she does this, the less she trusts her own perceptions. The authority she once held within slowly migrates outward. Real-life relationships often mirror this pattern clearly. In certain dynamics, one person explains while the other responds with skepticism, dismissal, or silence. The explaining partner grows more elaborate, more precise, more exhausted. Yet nothing changes. The reason is simple. Explanation has replaced self-respect, and where self-respect fades, power imbalance grows. The turning point arrives not through confrontation, but through awareness. She begins to notice that explaining has not protected her, it has exposed her. It has not brought closeness, it has created distance from herself. She sees that those who truly respect her never demanded explanations in the first place. They listened, they observed, they trusted. The ones who required constant clarification were often invested in keeping her uncertain. When she begins to withhold explanations, the shift is immediate and unsettling. Silence feels risky because it removes the familiar script. Without explanation, she can no longer manage how others perceive her. And this loss of control feels frightening at first. But beneath the fear lies a deeper truth. She was never meant to manage perception. She was meant to inhabit her truth fully and let others respond to it as they will. As she practices this restraint, something profound happens. The unconscious power she once handed over begins to return. Not as dominance, but as grounded presence. Her words become fewer, yet heavier. Her boundaries become clearer, yet quieter. She no longer argues for her reality. She allows it to exist without defense. This does not make her cold or distant. It makes her centered. People respond differently to her now. Some feel unsettled because they can no longer access her through confusion or doubt. Others feel drawn in because authenticity carries a gravity that explanation never could, and she learns through lived experience that true power was never in being understood. It was in self-trust. By no longer explaining, she reclaims the authority that always belonged to her. The psyche relaxes, the inner divisions heal. And in that quiet reclamation, she realizes that the most radical act is not speaking more clearly, but standing firmly in what needs no explanation at all. Silence is often misunderstood because it cannot be easily measured, explained, or defended. In a world that equates expression with strength and volume with certainty, silence is mistaken for absence. Yet true silence is not empty. It is full. It is the moment when the inner world and the outer world begin to align, no longer fighting for dominance. When a woman enters silence consciously, she is not retreating from life. She's gathering herself back from places where she was divided. For a long time, her words carried the burden of proof. She spoke to clarify, to justify, to soften, to repair. Language became a tool not only of communication, but of survival. Each sentence was shaped by anticipation, how it would land, how it would be judged, how it would be received. This constant outward orientation fractured her inner center. Part of her was always watching herself from the outside, adjusting, correcting, explaining. Silence, when it first appears, feels like danger because it removes that protective mechanism. The psyche resists silence because silence exposes truth without mediation. In silence, there is no narrative to hide behind, no performance to maintain. What remains is raw presence. For someone who has learned to survive through explanation, this presence feels unbearable at first. The nervous system signals alarm. Old fears surface. She wonders if silence will be misinterpreted, if it will provoke conflict, if it will lead to loss. These fears are echoes from earlier moments when being unseen felt unsafe. Yet if she stays with the silence, something subtle begins to unfold. The mind slows. The internal noise of self-monitoring fades. She becomes aware of how much energy was spent maintaining coherence for others while neglecting coherence within herself. Silence becomes a mirror, reflecting not what others think, but what she feels. In that reflection, fragments of the self that were pushed aside begin to return. Integration is not a sudden event. It is a gradual reunion. It is the moment when thought, feeling, instinct, and action stop pulling in different directions. Silence allows this reunion because it removes the pressure to perform. Without the need to explain, she no longer has to choose between authenticity and acceptance. She chooses presence instead, and presence has a quiet authority that words cannot replicate. In everyday life, this integration shows itself in small, almost invisible ways. She pauses before responding, not out of hesitation but discernment. She no longer fills space out of anxiety. Her body relaxes because it is no longer bracing for misunderstanding. Conversations change. She listens more deeply, speaks more intentionally. The words she does choose carry weight because they are no longer compensating for inner conflict. There is a misconception that silence means passivity, that it signals defeat or surrender. But true silence is active. It requires strength to resist the urge to defend, to clarify, to be liked. It demands trust in one's own experience. When she remains silent in moments where she once would have explained, she is not withdrawing. She is standing firmly in herself. This stance communicates more than any argument could. Others sense this shift immediately. Some interpret it as distance. Others feel challenged by it. Those who are accustomed to her self-doubt may feel disoriented because silence removes the familiar leverage they once had. Without explanations, there is nothing to argue against, nothing to dissect. What remains is her presence, steady and unfragmented. This presence sets a boundary without words. Emotionally, silence becomes a container where unprocessed feelings can finally settle. Instead of being discharged through explanation, emotions are felt, understood, and integrated. Anger loses its sharpness, sadness deepens into clarity, fear softens into awareness. This inner alchemy cannot occur in constant dialogue with the outside world. It requires inward attention. Silence provides that space. In moments of conflict, silence transforms the dynamic. Rather than escalating through justification, she allows the truth of the situation to reveal itself. She observes patterns she once missed. She notices who respects her boundaries without needing explanations, and who becomes uncomfortable when clarity replaces compliance. These observations are not intellectual, they are embodied. She feels them in her chest, in her breath, in the steadiness of her posture. Over time, silence becomes less about restraint and more about wholeness. She no longer experiences herself as divided into parts that speak, defend, and apologize. Those parts integrate into a unified presence. Her voice, when it emerges, is no longer reactive. It is grounded. It arises from alignment rather than fear. This is why silence is often misunderstood by those who live externally. They hear absence where there is fullness. They see withdrawal where there is consolidation. But for the woman who has entered this space, silence is not a loss. It is a return to the self that existed before explanation became a shield, before words were used to earn safety. In that return, she discovers a quiet truth. Strength does not announce itself. It settles. And in settling, it integrates everything that was once scattered. Self-worth does not announce itself loudly, nor does it demand recognition. It emerges quietly at the moment a woman realizes that she no longer needs to justify her existence, her feelings, or her choices. For a long time, justification may have felt like responsibility, even virtue. She explained herself to be fair, to be kind, to be understood. Yet beneath this habit lived a subtle belief that her inner reality was incomplete unless confirmed by others. The end of justification marks the beginning of a different relationship with herself. Justification is often mistaken for communication, but psychologically it serves another purpose. It attempts to secure safety by persuading the outside world to agree with the inside. Every time she justifies, she sends an unconscious message to herself that her truth alone is insufficient. Over time, this erodes self-trust. She begins to look outward for signals that she is acceptable, reasonable, worthy. The center of gravity of her identity shifts away from her own experience and settles in the reactions of others. This pattern rarely begins in adulthood. It forms when a young psyche learns that certain emotions create discomfort or disapproval. To preserve connection, she learns to explain instead of simply being, "I'm not upset, I'm just tired, I didn't mean it like that." These explanations become emotional currency traded for peace. As years pass, the habit deepens, and she may no longer recognize it as self-abandonment. It feels normal. It feels necessary. In relationships, justification often appears as overfunctioning. She takes responsibility for misunderstandings that are not hers to carry. She softens boundaries to avoid conflict. She revisits conversations, offering more context, more reasons, more evidence. Each attempt is driven by hope that if she explains enough, harmony will return. Yet harmony built on self-erasure cannot last. It quietly drains vitality and replaces it with fatigue. There comes a moment when exhaustion breaks the spell. She notices that despite all her explanations, certain dynamics never change. The same people continue to misunderstand her. The same boundaries are crossed. The same doubts resurface. This realization is painful, but it is also clarifying. It reveals that the problem was never a lack of clarity. It was a lack of self-recognition. When she begins to release justification, it feels unnatural at first. Silence where there once were reasons creates discomfort. She may fear being seen as cold, selfish, or unreasonable. These fears are remnants of an old belief that love must be earned through compliance. But as she stays with this discomfort, something within her reorganizes. The psyche starts to root itself internally rather than externally. Self-worth begins to form not as confidence, but as steadiness. She no longer rushes to correct perceptions. She allows others to have their interpretations without rushing to manage them. This does not mean she stops communicating. It means she stops defending her right to exist as she is. Her words become expressions rather than arguments. In everyday life, this shift is subtle yet profound. She says no without an explanation that trails behind it. She makes choices without rehearsing her reasons. She allows herself to be misunderstood by those who are unwilling to listen. Each of these moments strengthens an inner muscle that was once weak from disuse. That muscle is self-trust. Others respond differently to this change. Some feel relieved, sensing her new clarity. Others feel challenged because justification once gave them leverage. Without it, they must relate to her as an equal rather than a negotiator. This change may alter relationships, but it also reveals their true foundations. Self-worth does not seek to preserve every connection. It seeks to preserve integrity. Emotionally, the end of justification creates space. Feelings no longer need to be packaged for approval. Anger can be felt without explanation. Sadness can exist without apology. Joy can arise without being minimized. Emotional freedom does not make her reactive, it makes her whole. She is no longer split between what she feels and what she presents. Over time, this inner alignment becomes visible. Her posture changes. Her voice settles. There is less urgency in her interactions, less need to convince. People sense this groundedness instinctively. It is not intimidating. It is calming. It signals that she knows where she stands, even if others do not agree. Self-worth in this sense is not something she builds through achievement or validation. It is something she uncovers by removing what never belonged. Excessive justification, self-doubt, borrowed authority. What remains is a quiet certainty that her experience is real, her boundaries are valid, and her presence is enough. The world does not change all at once when a woman knows her worth. Yet everything around her begins to respond differently. The shift is subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but it carries a deep psychological gravity. It is not announced through declarations or demands. It emerges through posture, through tone, through the absence of apology in places where apology once lived. Others may not immediately name what has changed, but they feel it, and what they feel alters how they approach her. When she did not know her worth, the world met her with resistance. Her words were questioned, her boundaries tested, her presence negotiated. She adjusted herself constantly, adapting to the expectations and moods of others. This adaptation taught the world how to treat her. It learned that her limits were flexible, that her needs could be postponed, that her truth could be reshaped through pressure. None of this required cruelty. It happened naturally, as human systems always respond to what is permitted. Knowing her worth does not make her louder. In fact, it often makes her quieter, but the quality of her quiet is different. It is no longer the silence of uncertainty. It is the silence of self-possession. She no longer seeks confirmation before trusting her own perceptions. This inner alignment sends a signal that others instinctively read. People respond less to what is said and more to what is embodied. The world respects coherence. When a woman's inner truth matches her outer behavior, there is no contradiction to exploit. She does not over-explain, over-give, or over-accommodate. She responds rather than reacts. This consistency creates a psychological boundary that does not need enforcement. Others feel it and adjust accordingly, sometimes without understanding why. Some people step back when they encounter this change. They may feel unsettled because the dynamic they once relied on no longer exists. Where there was once negotiation, there is now clarity. Where there was once doubt, there is now certainty. This can feel like distance to those who benefited from her uncertainty. Yet this distance is not rejection, it is recalibration. Others step closer. They sense safety in her groundedness. When someone knows their worth, they no longer seek power through dominance or approval. They offer presence instead. This presence invites honesty. Conversations deepen. Respect becomes mutual rather than requested. The world begins to meet her where she stands rather than where she once bent. This transformation often reveals a painful truth. Not everyone is comfortable around self-worth. Some relationships were built on imbalance. When balance is restored, those structures weaken. She may notice that certain people accuse her of changing, becoming distant, or losing warmth. What they are responding to is not coldness, but the absence of self-sacrifice. The world often confuses boundaries with rejection, especially when it is accustomed to unlimited access. Knowing her worth also changes how she experiences challenges. Criticism no longer penetrates as deeply because it is no longer confused with truth. She listens, but she does not absorb everything. Praise, too, lands differently. She appreciates it without clinging to it. Her sense of self is no longer constructed from external reactions. This independence alters the power dynamics in every interaction. In professional spaces, this shift is particularly visible. She speaks with fewer qualifiers. She does not preemptively defend her ideas. Her presence commands attention not through force, but through certainty. Studies on leadership consistently show that confidence rooted in self-trust, rather than dominance, increases credibility. The world responds to this by offering space, listening more carefully, and assigning greater authority. Emotionally, knowing her worth allows her to tolerate misunderstanding without panic. She does not rush to correct every false assumption. She understands that being fully known is rare, and being respected does not require complete understanding. This tolerance removes desperation from her interactions. The world senses this lack of urgency and responds with greater care. Perhaps the most profound change occurs internally, yet it shapes every external response. She no longer interprets rejection as proof of inadequacy. She sees it as information about alignment. This reframing prevents the collapse that once followed disapproval. Because she stands firm within herself, the world cannot destabilize her as easily. Stability invites respect, even from those who disagree. Knowing her worth does not guarantee ease. It often brings moments of loneliness, especially when old dynamics fall away. But this loneliness is different from abandonment. It is spacious. It allows room for relationships that are grounded in mutual recognition rather than need. The world, sensing this shift, begins to offer connections that mirror her self-respect. Over time, the responses she receives confirm what she has already learned internally. Doors open without force, conflicts resolve without escalation. Boundaries are tested less frequently. None of this happens because she demanded it. It happens because the world responds to what she consistently embodies. When a woman knows her worth, she no longer asks the world to treat her differently. She treats herself differently, and the world follows. The moment she stopped explaining, she didn't become heartless. She became honest. She learned that her worth was never hidden in better words, longer sentences, or clearer arguments. Her worth was always there, waiting for her to stop proving it. And when she did, she finally came home to herself.